Hello, and welcome to Test 2 review session. This is the Content Edition. My name is Megan Benedict, as you may know, and I am your TA for Introduction to Entrepreneurship. Now, before we get into the video, I'm going to give a little bit of preamble, just like in the last video. So, like I mentioned, this will specifically be going over the content covered in the course, and this is from weeks 5 to 9. Which means it covers chapters 3 to 6. Okay, the other thing is there is live review sessions, which will be going over practice questions to test your knowledge. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so here are some of the details for the actual test itself. As you know, it's going to be happening on paper. It will be closed book, and in total, there will be 40 multiple choice questions. The date of your test is Thursday, March 26, 5:30 to 6:30. Again, this is on campus and in person. To see all this information again, and possibly more, please check Canvas announcements for more details. Now, let's get into the actual content review. First, we're starting off with Chapter 3, Feasibility Analysis. So, when we look at biases in this chapter, there are two that we actually focus on: confirmation bias and optimism bias, and these are not the same. However, they are somewhat similar, and it can be quite confusing, so I highly recommend you to understand confirmation bias versus optimism bias. So confirmation bias is looking for ways to justify your own existing beliefs. And as you can see, the picture for this one is very fitting. It's basically like you see some kind of information and you're just going through a checklist, checking off, does this match with what I already believe? On the other hand, optimism bias is overestimating the likelihood of positive outcomes. And the picture for this one is also quite fitting. It's just a big smiley face. So it's great to have a positive attitude for sure. But you also have to be able to be realistic, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so if you're overly optimistic without looking at what's really going on and doing things like, for example, some important financial analysis, then your chance of success will definitely be lower. All right. So when we're looking at feasibility analysis, it's broken down into 4 different parts. There is product/service feasibility, then industry/target market. The third is organizational feasibility analysis, and finally, like I previously mentioned, that financial aspect. Let's dive deeper. So, for the product/service feasibility analysis, there are 2 kind of sections within there. There's the desirability of your product or service, and there's the actual demand for the product or service. When you're looking at desirability, you're asking questions like, is my product or service desirable? Does it serve a need in the marketplace? And one thing you can use as a tool to help you assess and answer these questions is using something like a concept test with a concept statement. Now, for the demand of your product or service, you're going to be asking something along the lines of, is there sufficient demand for the proposed product or service? Now, tools you can utilize to answer this question are talking face-to-face with some potential customers, utilizing online tools to assess demand, and also looking at research, whether you're going through the library, internet, or doing some gumshoe research. Moving on. So industry/target market feasibility analysis also has 2 different segments within it. There is looking at the attractiveness of the industry, and there's also looking at the attractiveness of the target market. So when we're looking at an industry's attractiveness, an industry would be considered attractive if it is young, early in its life cycle, fragmented, growing. It serves a must-have, product or service. There is little competition, high operating margins, and not highly dependent on past low price of raw material, right? So it's highly unlikely that all of these things in this checklist are going to be true for an industry. That's incredibly rare. However, if you've got a lot of these kind of checked off for an industry, that's a very great sign. On the other hand, we also want to look at the attractiveness of the target market. So this is the specific segment of an industry. When you're looking at operating within an industry, you're not going to be looking at everything when you're actually looking at what your firm really does in that market. You're going to be looking at more of a specific segment, most likely. So that's kind of where this comes in. The best thing for the target market to be attractive is that your market is large enough for your proposed business. However, it is also small enough to not attract larger competitors. An interesting thing to consider when you're looking at your target market is how you define it. That's also something to keep in mind. Okay, so the organizational feasibility analysis. So overall, this one is looking at things that are non-financial, and this is like your non-financial resources and capabilities, right? This one breaks down again into two parts. I hope you can see the theme here. The first part is your management prowess, and if you recall, prowess is looking at things like your skills, capabilities, expertise, that sort of thing. The other segment is the resource sufficiency. So when you're looking at the management prowess, you want to see that your founder or founding team has passion for the business idea. If you recall from the last sections we've looked at in test 1, passion for the business is a big deal, right? Now, the second thing that we want from our founder/founding team is an understanding of the markets in which the firm will participate. And the reason that that's something you need is pretty clear to see. Now, when we're looking at resource sufficiency, like I mentioned, this is your non-financial resources, and typically you need 6 to 12 of these in order to succeed. Some examples of possible non-financial resources are space to launch your business, key management employees, your ability to obtain intellectual property protection, and your ability to form favorable business partnerships. Now, this is just a few, but there are many more listed within your textbook and from the class slides. Okay, now the final part to feasibility analysis is financial. This one actually breaks down into 3 sections: the total startup cash needed, the financial performance of similar businesses, and finally, overall financial attractiveness of the proposed venture. So when you're looking at the total startup cash, your question you're going to be asking yourself is, what are the startup costs for launching my new business? And what you can see from that is that you need to prepare an actual budget. Otherwise, you can't answer that question, right? When you're doing the actual budget and you're preparing that, putting that together, you need to be able to list all your likely capital purchases and operating expenses. Now, see how it says likely? Because this is before you've actually started doing a lot of those things. And so while things may change, it's good to have at least a foundation set. Now, when you're looking at financial performance of similar businesses, you want to look at those other businesses in order to estimate your own startup's financial performance. So to do this, you can look at things such as industry trend analysis reports, reports of individual firms, and also you could use simple observational research, which is simple and also can be difficult. If I don't know if she gave this example, but I've heard an example in the past of someone just standing in a parking lot watching the traffic of customers to a business, which sounds really creepy, I'll be honest. There's definitely better ways to do observational research, but yes. All right, now finally is overall financial attractiveness of the proposed venture. So here you're going to be looking at having a 5 to 7 year steady/rapid sales growth in the market niche. You also would like to have, preferably, a high percentage of recurring revenue. You want to be able to reasonably forecast your income and expenses. You need some form of internal fund generation, which kind of leads back to being able to generate revenue. And finally, you need to look at having an exit opportunity for investors to convert equity to cash. All right. Now we're going to move on to chapter number 4. Before we do, I would just like to say, I know I may not cover every single thing in chapter 3, and it might also be true for chapter 4 and so forth. This is important because I do want to cover as much as I can. However, I can't do every single concept and every single key term present in the class slides and the textbook, and I really hope that you guys use this in your studying, but that you also go through your own notes and those class slides, because that is really, really important as well. All right, moving on. Chapter number 4 is the business model. Okay, so what is a business model? A business model is a firm's plan or recipe for how it creates, delivers, and captures, bold for a reason, value for its stakeholders. Now, when you're looking at business models, there are 2 general types: your standard business model or disruptive. The standard business model is models that depict existing, keyword existing, plans or recipes that firms can use to determine how it will do what the definition says, basically. Now, disruptive business models are rare. They do not fit the profile of a standard business model, and they are impactful enough that they disrupt or change the way business is conducted in an industry or an important niche within that industry. So, as you can see, keyword for standard is that it's an existing plan or recipe. The keywords for disruptive is that it's rare, it's not standard, and that it disrupts or changes the way business is done. All right, moving on. So business models and their importance. This is kind of something I'm going to skim through because I know you guys talked about this in class, and I really, really want you to be able to go back to your notes for this part. It's not as big of a section as other things I'm going to discuss very shortly, so I highly recommend go back and check this. But business models are important because they help avoid these 3 areas for concern / pitfalls that a business owner / entrepreneur can fall into. The first is false market assumptions. Now, this is one that you feel like as long as you build your business, things are going to come. You're going to have customers and revenue, and you're going to not only break even, but you're going to make so much more than you have to spend on expenses. And does that always come true? Maybe not, especially if you fail to do certain important steps along the way. So keep in mind of that. The next one is unclear revenue streams. So you need to be able to make money in order for your business to thrive and keep going, right? Like I just mentioned, you want to be able to not only break even, but also at some point turn a profit. And if your revenue streams are not able to do that for you, that's not great. Finally, scalability and sustainability. So scalability, if you haven't heard of it before, is basically looking at the growth of your firm. So maybe when you're a startup, you start and you're just looking at one really specific area, and that's where you're rolling out. But maybe at that point or later on, you have plans to expand. So maybe right now you just want to operate in one specific area. And then later you're like, well, I would love to expand further out and maybe one day, have a presence all over the country, maybe all over the world, who knows? Or maybe it's just in scaling your business from a small startup to an established business, right? And sustainability, that is something you want to achieve is basically keeping your business alive. So we're here today, but in the long term, we still want to be here. And how can we do that? The reason that it's listed as a pitfall is because sometimes entrepreneurs are not able to, how do I say this? They're not able to properly consider scalability and sustainability. It's great to get yourself set up now, but you also want to be able to be here in the future. Okay, so this is some of the general parts of the business model. We're going to get into more specific parts shortly as well. So, first and most importantly is the offering. What value are you offering to your customers? And as you can see, I've put an acronym here, and CVP stands for Customer Value Proposition. That's pretty straightforward, to be honest. There is a lot more information related to CVP that might be a good idea to look at, and I have not gone into too much detail about it here. So please look back into your notes to see more information on that. The second is your customers. So who is it that you're really targeting? Third is your infrastructure. So what resources do you need? And finally, back to the finances, your financial viability. So the revenue and cost structures that the business needs to meet its operating expenses and financial obligations. Okay, so remember how before I mentioned that there's two different types of business models, standard and disruptive? Let's go through some standard. I've listed a lot, so I'm going to just say the names of the types and maybe not go through all the examples, but you can see it here on the screen. So for standard business models, you can have an advertising business model, which you recognize from, for example, Google. Auction, eBay is a good example. Bricks and clicks, so online and in person, Apple. Franchise business model. So there's some examples here, but if you think about like fast food chains such as McDonald's or Subway, Tim Hortons, Starbucks, those are all franchises as well. Okay, we've also got freemium. One that's not listed here that we're all familiar with is Spotify. Sorry. Spotify Premium has so many ads for itself within the app, and I'm sure you're all aware that one key feature of having it is that you no longer have those ads. There's low cost business model. So this is things like Warby Parker, who you may have heard about in class, possibly, Southwest Airlines, and also Costco, right? The manufacturer/retailer. So kind of when you're able to do both. For example, Apple again, or Tesla. Then there's peer-to-peer, which you've heard about Uber and Airbnb in class. So that one should be pretty familiar. Then there's razor and blades. So this is things like printers and ink cartridges, game consoles and games. And the key part here is that you're offering something such as a printer, which is a big heavy machine for a pretty cheap price. But the problem is you're going to need those ink cartridges and you're going to need them forever. That's a big source of recurring revenue, and those things are expensive. Then the next one's subscription. I'm sure we're all familiar with Netflix. And then finally, traditional retailer, right? And Amazon is considered one of those because they're a retailer in a traditional sense. Okay, so some disruptive business models. Now you will see Google and Uber here as well, but that is because they came up with this business model they used, and at the time that they released it, it was disruptive. And also, when you look at Uber, they don't just say, oh, the peer-to-peer business model in this description specifically. They're talking about the cloud-based service to connect riders and people willing to provide rides. Excuse me. So, in that sense, they had a disruptive business model. Now, Google, their online text ads on search engines was disruptive for their time. Other examples include Dell. Their direct-to-consumer computer sales model. So before they decided to roll this out, computer sales was not done directly to individuals. It was the business was selling to other businesses, and when you go into those retail stores, which is those other businesses, the individuals go to the retail stores to then purchase the computers, which still happens today, but that direct to consumer, just going online and buying your own laptop or computer on your own, wasn't really a thing. And finally, Salesforce. So they introduced SaaS, which stands for Software as a Service, and they are a SaaS provider of customer relationships management, CRM software. Okay. Now, the Barringer Ireland business model template. This one's pretty big, so bear with me. There's 4 different sections covered within this template, and of those 4 sections, there are multiple subsections. I'm not going to go into crazy detail about all those things, so I'm hoping to give you this reminder and broad-ish overview, and I hope that you go back and study more. So, the first one is your core strategy. This describes how the firm plans to compete relative to its competitors. Secondly, you have your resources. So this is the inputs a firm uses to produce, sell, distribute, and service a product or service. So think here as being competitive with your resources. It must be hard to imitate and find a substitute for in order for it to be considered a competitive advantage in that sense for your resources. Financials, so describe how the firm actually earns its money. And of course, as we've noticed from the past slides we've looked at, that's important. And finally, operations. So this is integral to a firm's overall business model, and essentially it represents the day-to-day heartbeat of the firm. So let's get in more detail. Core strategy has 4 subsections that it likes to cover. So business mission is within this section, as well as basis of differentiation, target market, and the product/market scope. I'm sure you're familiar with a business's mission. If you go online, search the About Us section for pretty much any company, they should have some kind of mission statement that you can very clearly see. And basis of differentiation, this is explaining how this specific firm is different from its competitors. Because if its competitor is offering a very similar product or service, this firm has to be different in some kind of way that brings value to the customer. Target market, we've gone over that one pretty in depth, I would say, in the past few slides, and product/market scope is kind of similar. We're gonna leave that and I'll let you look at it on your own. Resources. So this is where you're looking at your core competencies and key assets. I'm going to keep going a little fast for these because I don't think I should go too much in detail. Apologies. Financials. So now this is where you're looking at your revenue streams, your cost structure, and your sources for financing and or funding. I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory. Finally is the operations. So this is the product or service production, your channels, and key partners involved. All right. So now we're moving on to chapter number 5, and this is looking more specifically at your industry and competitor analysis. So some initial questions for the entrepreneur. First, is the industry accessible? Which means, is it a realistic place for a new venture to enter? Next, does the industry contain ripe markets? To break that down, is there markets that have room for innovation or that are underserved? And finally, are there positions in the industry that will avoid some negative attributes of the overall industry. Now, position basically is talking about how a firm will position itself relative to its competitors. Okay, so when we're studying the industry trends, there are two main areas that we're looking at: environmental and business. On the environmental side, we're looking at things such as economic trends, social trends, technological advances, and political and regulatory changes. Excuse me. You might recognize that from a previous chapter covered in Test 1 as well. Now, when we're looking at the business side of it, this is where you're going to things such as trade associations, trade shows, reading trade journals, right? Okay, Porter's 5 forces model. There's 5 of these, as you can see, and if you've taken past certain business courses, you may or may not have heard of these already. Fear not, you may see them again. So these are the threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants, rivalry among existing firms, bargaining power of suppliers, and the bargaining power of buyers. So if you're looking at each one specifically, it's a good thing if the bargaining power of buyers is low and the bargaining power of suppliers is low. That makes sense. You as a firm want to have more bargaining power. More power than your suppliers, who you need to buy your resources from, and more power than your buyers, who you want to buy your products. You want your threat of substitutes and your threat of new entrants also to be low. Bear with me. You do. You want your threat of substitutes to be low because if there's a lot of other products or services, not between you and your competitor, but between the industry that you're looking at and other industries, if you have a high threat of substitutes, chances are you may not be getting as big a piece of pie as you wish you would. Threat of new entrants, even though you may be a new entrant, you generally want the threat of new entrants to be low. And rivalry among existing firms, you do not want there to be intense rivalry among existing firms because that could make it incredibly difficult to try and get in between that, especially when the rivalry is between a very small number of firms who have a large share of the market. There is more details about all of these, but this is one of those things that I'm not going to cover too hard on, and I really, really want you to go back and look at. This one for sure. It's good to understand what each of these forces mean, if you want it to be high or low, and also what is Porter's 5 forces model actually assessing? You do all this to calculate what? I'm not going to tell you, no spoilers, because I know you have the answers, and I want you to find it. And there's also a lot of other things to cover. Okay, speaking of, we also should look at industry types and what their related opportunity is. So when we're looking at an emerging industry, this industry is incredibly new. The cool thing about getting in on this one is having first mover advantage, right? So you are pioneering this industry, which means you have a lot that you can do to pave the way and set it up the way you want. Next is fragmented. So this one, a little bit self-explanatory. It's a fragmented market. And the funny thing about that, when you have a lot of fragments all around, an opportunity you have is to consolidate it, right? And an example of this is something such as a geographic roll-up. Okay, another industry type is a mature one. So mature, it's been around for a while, sometimes you may not be pioneering things, right? You're not quite in a fully new kind of industry. So the related opportunity here is process and after sales service innovation. Next, we have declining industry type. Now, this one, there's a couple different opportunities you can look at. You can look at leader. You could be a leader in this industry, and that you may not be pioneering things like you are in the first mover, but you do also have a lot of say, just like in the other one. Niche. So this is when you're looking at a very niche market. That means you're able to carve out a spot for yourself in this market. There's also harvest and divest opportunities. I'm not going to go too much detail. And finally, there is the global industry types. And your opportunity here is to operate multinationally and globally. Apologies for the long pauses. I am starting to lose my voice already. I'm not sick, I'm just talking a lot. I've got water now. Let's continue. Okay, so this is another figure from the textbook. The one from Porter's Five Forces. I didn't think I should make my own graphic because I feel like it did it very well. In this case, too. This is the different types of competitors that new ventures face. So, I have mentioned a couple of these, but we'll get into it. So there's direct competitors. So these are the businesses who offer similar or identical products or services to your own. If we're looking at, let's say, the water bottle industry. If you look at, let's say, Smart Water, and you compare it with Fiji Water. Fiji Water is a direct competitor to Smart Water. There's also, of course, like the Real Canadian, Spring Water brand, and so many more. And those all are direct competitors. Indirect competitors are businesses offering close substitute products. So we did mention substitutes a little bit here and there, but an example here with the water bottle industry is, let's say someone's going to buy juice, milk, beer even. Those are all examples of other products that still are something that someone might drink as a beverage, might quench your thirst, and in that sense, it does sometimes serve the same purpose as drinking water, right? Finally, we have future competitors. These are businesses that are not yet direct or indirect competitors, but they could be at any time. So this could be, for example, new entrants to the industry. So let's say sometime in the future, a new company springs up that is very focused on water they say can make you see in the dark. That's a silly example. Who knows, maybe it'll happen. But that would be a future direct competitor. And then maybe in the future, there's a new juice company that gets created, and they're a new entrant not in this direct industry of water bottles, but in the indirect section, because if someone's making juice could be considered indirect competitor to water. So there you go. You could also be looking at a company that currently exists but does not offer a beverage, or maybe a beverage in this sense, but maybe somewhere down the line they decide to enter and create either a water bottle brand or something similar. Okay, so there are many different sources of competitive intelligence. I've got 6 here. Let's go through them. One source of competitive intelligence is attending conferences and trade shows. Another is setting up Google Alerts. We've also got purchasing competitors' products. Totally okay to do. You can go into the store and, heck, let's use the water bottle example. You can go into, I don't know, your average grocery store and pick up some case or container of water, and no one's going to stop you. That's totally fine. That's totally legal, even if in your own job you're working at a water bottle company, right? When you do this, you go and purchase one of your competitors' products, then you're able to see, okay, what is it that they do? How does this thing work? And I'm not going to copy them, obviously, but what is it that they do well that I should figure out how to do well in my own way, maybe? When you attend the conferences and trade shows, those are really great places to learn information, not just from the speakers, honestly, but also the trade shows you get to see maybe a little more of what those companies are doing, and even just conversations that you have that are more formal or even just kind of informal can provide a lot of cool and important information. Right, moving on. So there's reading industry-related books, magazines, websites, and blogs. So this one's not your face-to-face chatting with people, but also a great wealth of knowledge you can earn from reading these kinds of resources. Now, a similar thing to that last one, technically the last 2 points, is studying your competitors' websites and social media pages. So again, this is a different type of resource that's not face-to-face, but it's your ability to kind of go online in some sense and see what it is your competitors are doing, not to copy them. Again, you do not want to just copy and paste what someone else is doing. That is not legal. Most likely, please don't do that. But getting a sense for what it is they're doing and how they're doing it. So you can see, okay, this is maybe what I do need in order to thrive and survive in this market or industry. And lastly, your last source of competitive intelligence is talking to customers. So this could be asking them a really simple question such as, why did you buy my product or service and not my competitor's product or service? Right? Okay, and now we're on to last chapter, chapter number 6, writing a business plan. Now, before we get into this one, I will just say, sometimes when you're looking at the theories between the feasibility analysis, the business model, and the business plan, you'll see a lot of recurring themes, and some of the terms are similar, as you may have seen already, and sometimes they're a little bit different. So when you're studying, make sure you don't get them mixed up. They kind of build off each other, which helps with your understanding. But if you're asked a question like, is what part of the, I'll give you a better example. You're asked a question about which part of the business plan covers this kind of information. And it gives you some options, and maybe one option is something that's not specifically in a business plan, but it's something covered in the business model. Or maybe you're asked a question like, which part of the business model might you see this information? And it's actually talking about like one of your options is not in your business model, but it's in maybe your feasibility analysis options. So that's just something to keep in mind. Anyways, chapter 6. Okay, so this is another screenshot. This one's actually from your course slides because I thought it summed this up very, very well. So kudos to the professor here. This is the types of entrepreneurial plans that an entrepreneur could put together. And they have very different purposes for very different audiences. And don't rely on this last bit too much, but they do have a difference in their actual page or slide count. Okay. The first one is your business brief. So this is for family, friends, advisors, other interested stakeholders. And brief is a key word here, it's 2 to 3 pages. The purpose of your business brief is to have something in writing to show anyone, literally anyone, interested in the business. So very broad, right? Very broad, very broad. You'll see why I'm saying that so much. Next is our feasibility study, which we've kind of talked about in chapter 3. The primary audience for this one is internal only. This is looking at your team members and your advisors, right? You don't want everybody to see that. And it's kind of really important for your internal team in assessing what the situation is, what industry and market, and all those other things we talked about, so you can put together your business model and your business plan and figure a lot of things out for your actual firm. This one's going to be 10 pages, roughly. It does say plus, so it could be more than that, potentially. The purpose of your feasibility study, I kind of said it a little bit, but in different words, it is to assess the potential of a new concept. This can act as proof that the venture has market potential or market fit, right? And that description is probably better than mine, but we'll keep going. Next is a pitch deck. So the funny thing is, you guys are going to have, as you hopefully understand and know, a pitch presentation you're doing as part of your big individual assignment. This is definitely interesting for you. Okay, so your pitch deck, the primary audience is early investors, judges of venture competitions, incubators, and accelerators. Now, for this pitch deck, it does say 3 to 20 slides. I don't off the top of my head remember how many slides you guys are able to make, but I believe it is within that range, if I'm not mistaken. We continue on. Though definitely on the lower side, I would say. I don't see you guys having 20 slides. But anyways, the purpose of the pitch deck is to get your next meeting with a potential investor, or to apply for an incubator program, or to win a competition. And you can see those things lining up depending on what your primary audience is, right? And finally, the business plan, which is the name of this chapter, so we're going to get more into that one for sure. The primary audience for your business plan is banks and investors, though we will look at when that may be a little bit of a different primary audience. We'll get back to that. And the primary purpose to get funding? Yes, most of the time. Again, there's more, and it says 25 plus, but again, not always the case. So don't look too heavily on that last part for the business plan, because that's what this whole chapter is going to cover, and we're going to get so much in detail about it very shortly. But when you're looking at what is a business brief, feasibility study, pitch deck, that's where I highly recommend to look at this graphic. Business plan, it's good, but try to ignore that last row for the purpose of the full understanding. Okay, so speaking of business plans, obviously, here we go. So the reasons and audiences for writing this. Now, as you can see, when you're looking at the internal reason for writing the business plan, it says here it's for employees. So in that sense, are you getting funding from your employees? Now, your founders / entrepreneurs, founding team, they should have skin in the game. They should be spending some money on the firm when you're starting up. However, just your average employee that's not the founder, and an employee who's not the founder most likely is not, your source of funding. Most likely. The reason here is it forces your founding team to systematically think through all aspects of the new venture. Also, it gives managers and employees direction in their work at the firm. That is a very different reason and audience compared to external reason. And this is what we were talking about a little bit before when you're looking at writing your business plan for investors, bankers, and other similar external stakeholders. The reason for them is to communicate merits of the new venture and persuade these outsiders to invest in the firm. So for external reason, it does line up with being for investors and bankers and getting that financing or funding. But internally, you could be writing your business plan for employees to make sure you think through the process and operations of your actual firm and giving that direction to people employed at the firm. All right. So some red and green flags. Now, the green flags are basically a opposition to the red flags, so bear with me. So some red flags for your business plan that you do not want to have. Founders with none of their own money at risk. So I did kind of say this a little bit in the last slide. You want your founders to have quote unquote skin in the game. Because if a founder is not willing to put their own money at risk for the sake of their business, then why should anybody else, right? And so the alternative green flag is that a founder or founders have financial risk for their business, just meaning that they're putting their own money at risk to fund their business, right? Another red flag is a poorly cited plan. I'm sure as a student, you guys are all familiar with needing citations, references, works cited for your work, and that's true for a business plan as well. And how do you combat that? Having research, evidence, facts, and citing it, right? That's pretty straightforward. Another red flag is defining the market size too broadly. Now, I did kind of mention this a little bit in the last chapter, so keep that in mind. And keep that in mind. Here it is again, right? And the alternative green flag here is to be precise, clear, and specific on your target of market that you're actually looking at, right? Next, you do not want to have overly aggressive financials. This is where you want to be realistic, not overly positive, like with the optimism bias that I kind of mentioned. And now, how do you make sure that you're not falling into that positive optimism bias? That is, you can use your green flag instead to be credible. And how can you be credible? Using, again, linking back to one of our other green flags, having research and sound reasoning backed by that research, right? Finally, you do not want to have sloppiness, laziness, or unprofessional appearance in any part of your business plan. Green flag, obviously, being professional, being accurate, not having spelling mistakes, grammatical errors all throughout your business plan, and articulating yourself in a way that is not casual conversational, right? To be professional. Okay, so there are 3 types of business plans. I feel like you're going to hear like types and categories so much, but there's 3 key types of business plans. So we've got the summary business plan. This one is actually quite small compared to the other ones. It's roughly 10 to 15 pages, and the summary business plan is quote unquote testing the waters. It's kind of written for investors because when you're writing a summary business plan, you may not have the funds to write a full business plan, which we'll get into soon. But in the summary business plan, similar to not having funds, means that you're most likely very early in your development stage of the firm, right? And the overall purpose of the summary business plan is that you're using it to assess outsiders' interest in your idea. Next, we have the full business plan. Now, this one is longer for sure. It's 25 to 35 pages roughly. And this one is the most commonly used business plan, which is why when we saw it in the graphic before, it said 25 plus because of this one. This one's also written for investors. However, you're at a development stage that's further along than being very early, though you are possibly early enough that you do need that financing or funding. And maybe you're not super early in your stage of your development. You could be later on and you just need that financing or funding at that point in time. And that's fair too. Finally, we've got the operational business plan. And this one is very big for good reason. This one's roughly 40 to 100 pages long. This one's quote unquote the blueprint for the firm's operations. Now, technically, you can say that the full business plan is also somewhat of a blueprint for the firm's operations. However, this term blueprint, in terms of the firm's operations, is most applicable for the operational business plan, especially because it was written for operational managers and employees of the firm, right? So if you want a blueprint for the firm's operations, who needs that the most? The people working there, right? Now, this one, because it's so big, so long, usually when you write this one, you're later in your development stage and you're more established. And overall purpose of this one is that it provides guidance and detail for your employees. Okay, so I know we're all feeling like this is a very long list, and goodness, I don't know. Is she gonna go over every single part of a business plan? I hope not. And I also hope not. Let's see. I might talk a little bit about them, but I'm not gonna go crazy in detail. I think it's good to understand what actually is in a business plan and your outline. And you can probably link this one back to relating to like a full business plan and or operational. Summary business plan, probably not going to have all these sections, or maybe it might have it and it's just really, really small, right? So in your business plan, the outline should include a cover page, table of contents, and then when you get into the actual body of your business plan, you've got first your executive summary, then industry analysis, company description, market analysis, economics of the business, marketing plan, design and development plan for the product/service, operations plan, management team and company structure, overall schedule, and financial projections. And finally, ending it off at the appendix or appendices. So as you can see, I've bolded the body of it, and a lot of these are things that have been mentioned in some way or another when we looked at either the feasibility analysis or the business model, like operations. We remember looking at operations in some of those sections. When we look at financial projections or economics of the business, that relates to the financial things we've looked at in some of the other sections as well. Right? Industry analysis. Of course, we've covered that, but it's different here. This is a different type of tool, resource, and when it's mentioned here, it's a little bit different. So keep that in mind. Okay, so for your cover page, just wanted to show that it's a little bit important to have some information you may not have thought would be on your cover page. So what would be pretty standard and expected is for your cover page to have information about the company, such as the name of the company, the address of where it's located, a phone number for the company, a website link, and or social media link, if it's applicable. Now, something you may not have expected is to have the lead entrepreneur's contact information, such as their email address and cell phone number, on the cover page as well. Now, it's important as well that you realize that this information of the lead entrepreneur, only the lead entrepreneur specifically, on the cover page is not within your appendices, and it's not within management team and company structure section. So definitely important to know that at least the specific lead entrepreneur's contact information is actually in the cover page. Okay, executive summary. So the executive summary is a short overview of the entire rest of the business plan. Who's really going to be reading this executive summary? For the most part, is going to be people who are really busy, such as certain types of investors and things like that, right? And the thing is, they may only read the executive summary. That is a possibility, and for that reason, it should include the information, the key details of the entire rest of the business plan, or else they're not going to think you have everything there. And the other key thing is, because it needs to encapsulate the entire business plan, you write the executive summary last, after everything else. Okay, industry analysis. So there's a lot of different things here that need to be or should be included in your industry analysis. For this section and many others going forward for the business plan parts, I'm not going to go crazy in detail. Please look through the textbook, class notes, personal notes. There's a lot here. Don't have the time. So, industry analysis. This is where you look at things such as the size of the industry, its growth rate, and sales projections. You can also look at the structure of the industry, nature of participants, key success factors, industry trends, and long-term prospects. So some of these I've kind of mentioned a little bit here and there as we looked at it in other sections, but feel free to look it up some more. Okay, then we have the company's description. So again, you might see some similar things as before, but here we're looking at the company history, the mission statement, the products and services the company offers, the current status, legal status and ownership, and key partnerships, if any. Market analysis. So this is where we're looking at market segmentation and target market selection. Also the buyer's behavior, competitor analysis, and estimates of annual sales and market share. That last one, pay attention. It might sound like something that you would see in a financial part. Market analysis does have a little bit of numbers in it. Keep that in mind. Economics of the business. So this is where we're looking at net revenue drivers and profit margins, those fixed and variable costs, operating leverage and its implications, startup costs, and also the break-even chart and calculation. So, just very briefly, fixed costs are costs you're going to incur regardless of how many units you produce or sell. Variable costs are costs that depend on the number of units produced. Now again, you may be creating a product that number of units produced maybe is not how you do that. I'm not too sure. But if you're looking at, for example, a company that has services they offer compared to products, then maybe your variable costs are not measured as per unit produced. It could be some other kind of variable. That's just how that one works. And break even. Break even is when your revenue is equal to your expenses, right? So when that happens, revenue minus expenses is your profit. And if your profit is 0, that means you're breaking even. Okay, the marketing plan. So in your marketing plan, this is where you're seeing your overall marketing strategy, your product, price, promotions, and distribution. That's a lot of the P's. If you've taken marketing already, you might recognize that one. The sales process or sales cycle, and the sales tactics. Now we have the product or service design and development plan. So this is looking at things such as the development status and tasks, challenges and risks, projected development costs, and proprietary issues such as patents, trademarks, copyrights, licenses, and brand names. Operations plan. So here you're looking at the general approach to operations, the business's location, as well as facilities and equipment. Management team and company structure. So, management team, including a skills profile. So, as I mentioned, we remember that there's the leading entrepreneur's contact information only appearing on the cover page. However, we need to look at the entire management team and provide a profile, not only of who they are, but also what skills they bring to the table and what work it is that they're doing with the firm. These are people that are really important for investors to look at and also for the organization itself to understand, okay, who is in charge and what do they do? Other parts included in the management team and company structure are the firm's board of directors, board of advisors, and of course, the company structure. Okay, overall schedule. This one is pretty clear cut and straightforward, but in case you may have a little bit of confusion, overall schedule is looking at the major events required to launch the business. There are many different examples of what those major events or milestones might be for a firm, but some small examples, to go briefly, could be completing prototypes, obtaining the needed financing or funding, earning your first sale of your product or service, and so forth. Okay, then we have our financial projections. So again, this is looking at that kind of monetary side, but it's a little bit different than the economics. This is where we're looking at the sources and uses of funds statement. We've got statements, sheets, and flows and such. Anyways, we also have the assumptions sheet, pro forma income statements, pro forma balance sheets, pro forma cash flows, and ratio analysis. Pro forma, if you're not familiar, pro forma means like in the future. So, not what your income statement is right now, but what you expect it to be in the future. And that makes sense because this is the financial projections. So, this is what your projection is for the future for some of these things, right? Finally, our appendix or appendices. So, this one could or may not include some of these things listed here. You could have the resumes of the top management team. So yes, we did have a profile for them in a different section. However, if you wanted to include their full resume, it's a little bit too long for that section. So that kind of thing would be included here in the appendix. You could also have photos or diagrams of the actual product or service that you have, or prototypes of it. You can also have certain types of financial data. So yes, we did cover quite a lot of monetary things within the economics of the business section, as well as financial projections. But if you wanted to get really specific, or maybe you have some kind of specific pictures, diagrams, or bar graphs, or something that you wanted to include, but it takes up a lot of space, you can include that kind of information here. And finally, your market research projections. Okay, so that's it for the textbook. Please don't go just yet. I do have a section here for some of the case and article examples that were discussed either within your class discussion and or within the textbook, however, and or posted on Canvas. However, I do not cover all of them. I want to be very clear on that. And that is because I ended up going a bit in depth for some of them. And so I don't want to spend a long time. When I say I'm running out of time or things like that, I'm saying that because this is a video, and yes, you can go back, rewatch it as many times as you want. But if I made this covering every single thing, it would be incredibly long. Think about it. You go into class and your time slot you may not be there the whole time because it might not be that full 3 hours, but there is 3 hours allotted every week to go over a different chapter. Can you imagine if I took 2 to 3 hours to go over every single chapter? This would be so long. You guys wouldn't be able to get through it. It would just be way too much. And so, I'm trying to keep this detailed, but also trying to bring a lot of just reminders to go back and look at other things. So this here is your big reminder. I might say it again later, hopefully not. This is your big reminder. I'm going to cover some cases and articles here. However, there are many that I wish for you to go back in Canvas, go back to your class discussions, your class slides, your personal notes, and see what the ones I miss are. Okay? I'm also going to be high level with some of these. So if you want certain specific details that you think are important that you want to look over, for sure, go ahead and look at those as well. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so this one's actually from the textbook. Surprisingly enough, this was covered in chapter 4. So as you can see, I didn't bring an example from chapter 3. Apologies on that. There wasn't too many, I would say, in terms of the articles posted in Canvas from chapter 3, week 7, but there may be quite a few that you see feasibility analysis when you're looking at not the textbook, sorry, when you're looking at the class slides. So if memory serves, you guys looked at Juicero, Keurig Cold, Dropbox, and Google Glasses. It was called Google Glass, but their glasses. Anyways, important, please go back and look at those for sure. And also look at the article that was posted in Canvas as well. I will verbally say very quickly, you have to look at, when it comes to Juicero and Keurig Cold, failures that they have in their feasibility analysis, but also their biases. One of them has confirmation bias, and the other one has an optimism bias. If you haven't already heard and know the answer, I implore you to go and check it out, see what you think, which one is which. All right. Now, please go back and look at those. For a lot of those ones, there is immense detail covered in your class slides. So for me to make another slide reiterating, maybe not the best, right? So please go ahead, look at those. And now we're back to here. Chapter 4, Headspace. Okay, so this one, when we're looking at chapter 4, we're looking at the business model. And one of those bolded words that, if you recall, was value. And when you're looking there, we're looking at how the business model creates, delivers, and captures value. So there we go. I broke it down like that, exactly like that for this slide here. So how does Headspace create value? Well, they teach meditation and mindfulness to people worldwide. They help people create life-changing habits to support their mental health and provide them with a healthier and happier life. How do they deliver their value? They provide customers with an easy-to-use and affordable platform. And finally, how do they capture their value? So, in a tangible sense, they capture value through the profits earned from their 3 different revenue streams. In an intangible way, they capture value by seeing its service help millions of people improve their lives. So there you go. This one is very interesting. If you do look in the textbook, you will find it within chapter 4. I would encourage you, if you have the chance, to go back, maybe look what are those 3 revenue streams that they have, if you're curious. But yeah, so that is Headspace. And this is from week 7, chapter 4, business models. Okay, from week 8, chapter 5, She Taxis, is actually an article that was posted in Canvas. Okay, so I just go over a little bit of looking at the breakdown of the article itself. So first, what's the company context? So in this specific example, there's some social background to recognize. There is violence, harassment, and sexual assault against women. That happens. It happens in a lot of different places to a lot of different people, and it happens all over the world. It is unfortunate reality. It is also quite prevalent in public spaces and transportation. So, This company looks at that context and provides a potential solution. Let's get into it. So the industry type that this firm, She Taxis, is operating in is the taxi and car services industry. Specifically, they have a niche market strategy. If you recall, niche market strategy is something used in declining industries. So anyways, niche market. And why is it niche? It's because they're doing it, they have their firm, it's by women and for women. Women only drivers for specifically only women passengers, right? Okay. And the reason for that is they want the drivers to be safe, and a little more specifically, they want their customers / passengers to feel safe, right? Because it is true that sometimes the taxi driver or Uber driver or whoever it may be, but the driver for something in this industry has a woman passenger, and unfortunately, she has some kind of very negative experience relating to violence, harassment, or sexual assault. And that is really unfortunate. So, we continue. All right. Some challenges that the company is facing in the actual article that it discusses. It says that they're having a staffing problem. Now, there's not too much detail provided on this specific issue that they're facing. However, it's important to recognize that their drivers are only women, and, their passengers are only women. If they're having a staffing problem, it could be something in their hiring. Maybe there's not quite enough supply of female drivers in whatever area it is that they're operating in. Could be so many other reasons. We don't really have too much information on that. Moving on. There is big legal issues. Now, the thing is, I keep mentioning, is that they only hire women to drive their vehicles, right? And so when they hire people, their hiring practices specifically exclude men on the basis of gender, which in the area that they're operating, which is within the US, technically that is discrimination against someone based on gender, which is not great. There's also that sort of thing at play from the customer side, because not only is it only women driving, but there's only women as passengers, which means that there are no male customers included in their potential customer service, right? And that also presents an issue. Turning away customers on the basis of gender is a big deal, legally speaking. So, there you have it. There's more information as well. I would highly recommend going back and looking at their business plan and how they really operate, because it is really interesting. But I don't want to go super duper in depth here. I highly recommend looking back at it. But I just wanted to present here some background on the company and then some challenges that they're facing now. All right. Adelphi Healthcare. This is another article that was actually posted in Canvas. This is from week 9, chapter 6. And the thing here is I try my best to go more in depth on this one. And you may want to keep this one in mind when it comes to looking at my practice questions. I'm going to say this one more time. I really shouldn't, but I will. There are other articles posted in Canvas from week 9, chapter 6. Please, please, please go back, read those over. take out what's the key takeaway. I'm going to do a little bit deep analysis on this one, and so I know sometimes the articles are long, but finding that key takeaway is the most important. If you can do nothing else, figure out what the key takeaway is from each case or article. That is the best and kind of the bare minimum, but it is the best way in order to understand, like, okay, what was this case? What is it about? What does it mean? Right? You may not need to know, like, all the nitty-gritty details. And I don't think you should go about memorizing what year something happened. Definitely not. Definitely don't recommend doing that. It's about what is this case about? If you have the chance to go through and see, okay, well, how does this really apply to the concepts that we learned in that week? That's amazing. Really, really great. But if nothing else, figure out what's the key takeaway from each case or article. All right. Now, let's get into this specifically. So, Adelphi Healthcare. Their early success can be attributed to 4 key factors: their talented entrepreneurial team, the willingness and interest of customers early on. In this case, their customers were hospitals. Third, a talented pool of healthcare recruits. Now, if you read the case, you'll know that their recruits in healthcare workers are actually from foreign countries. And this specific company is trying to offer foreign healthcare recruits to hospitals within the US because of the shortage in the workforce there, right? And fourth, I kind of just said it in different words, but the high demand in the US for nurses and other healthcare staff. Okay, now what they're doing is great, and they did have some early success. At this point in the case, however, they have run into a major concern. The US government ceased offering new EB3 visa green cards. Now, this specific green card offered benefits. It was 10 years long, I believe. You don't have to know that. But it offered specific benefits, especially catered to people like healthcare workers. Adelphi, so the firm, relied heavily on these specific green cards for the foreign healthcare workers that they recruited. That was the visa green cards they had given to all of the recruits that they currently had pulled over and that they brought over to the US to work, and also what they were relying on for their future recruits that they're hoping to bring into the US to work in hospitals. So, these specific green cards were so integral to the firm's business plan. Now, see, this is from chapter 6, all about business plans, and this aspect was so important to theirs. If they could no longer obtain visa cards, there goes their entire business, because their business is centered around bringing foreign healthcare workers into the US, giving them these green cards so they can work and stay in the US at hospitals there. You have no green card, you have no workers. So, there was a few possible solutions that were brought forth in this case. One was to raise additional capital and hope for more of these EB3 visas to be offered in the future. In the case, it says the government is stopping to offer and produce them at this point in time. So the first option is like holding on to hope that eventually we'll get more. The second option is to move some recruits from the EB3 visa to an HB1 or HBI visa. Now, this other visa works a little bit differently, and the benefits are not quite the same, meaning they're not quite as good, to be honest. It's also true that the other type of visa is not quite tailored to healthcare workers in the way that EB3 is. It's also interesting to note that they want to move some of the healthcare workers that they already have working in the US to this other type of visa. For that reason, and because they have been operating for a while, the number of workers that they need to move from one visa to the other is in the thousands. It's a big deal. So they can't just obtain all of the HBI visas that they would need. They have to do some at a time in batches. And that would also kind of prove a bit difficult, right? Their third and final option is to sell their company to someone else who could then make some kind of difference or change up some kind of way that the company is operating in order to keep it going forward. Those are their three options. Definitely risks involved with all of those, but yeah. Okay, so I didn't have a slide for it here, but like I mentioned before, I'm going to say it one last time. Read through this case, try and understand, like, what is the big picture here, right? What is this case about? I've broken it down a little bit, gone a bit more in depth than I have for some of the other cases / articles covered here. But please, think a little more deeply when you read the case. What is it about? That's the key part. All right. We also have here, this is from the same week. I apologize. I do have one more article that I cover here. This one is The Road to Entrepreneurial Success, Business Plans, Lean Startup, or Both. It was an incredibly long name, and to save your eyes, I just put the last section of that title. But there you go, that's the whole title. This is another article posted in Canvas under Week 9, Chapter 6. And this one is interesting because it's trying to compare writing a business plan to operating to writing a business plan versus looking at operating as a lean startup and the activities involved in those two things. It's trying to see, is one better to pursue than the other, or should both of those things be done? The results is what I have here. The answer is that both should be used. However, not just, oh yes, we want to do every single little thing for both of these different types of tools. Instead, there are certain activities that were actually specifically tied to entrepreneurial success from the results of this study. In terms of business planning, the actual factor that helped was the writing of the business plan itself. So the act of writing the business plan was the most important and most tied to success of the business planning activities. Not all the little things, the actual writing of the business plan. There is a lot that goes into that, I will say. It's not that you just sit down and, go crazy writing things that aren't realistic or plausible. Because as we mentioned, so many things about the business plans in the content section, it's important to still do all of those things. It's just that when you write it down, you put it all together, that is where you get the most value. Now, from the lean startup activities, there were 3 that were found specifically to be contributing to success. Interviewing potential customers, collecting pre-orders, and pivoting what you're doing based on customer feedback. So that one's kind of tied to the first one, but it's kind of just saying, yes, you're interviewing potential customers, and that's so important. But imagine that you talk to customers and you don't take anything that they say as a note. they could have some really good, important notes or feedback for you. So you need to also make sure that you take in what they're saying and make it mean something. Now, that doesn't mean that every single customer is going to have something that you're able to accomplish, but it's important to have notes and know where to go, right? Okay. Sample questions. Oh, look, there's no sample questions on here. What the heck? Why is that? If you recall from the beginning of the video, there are live virtual review sessions on Google Meet that I will be hosting, and I really recommend that if you'd like to test your knowledge and understanding, if you're interested, please join. There's going to be 4 of them. No, scratch that. 5. There's 5 in total. So that's 5 different time slots that I hope one of those 5 is something you're actually available for. Please try your best and come. It's definitely beneficial because we'll have lots of practice questions at that point in time. So yeah, see Canvas announcements for more details. And good luck on test 2. I believe in you guys, and yeah, you got this. All right, thank you. Signing off.